Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Deja vu.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone, discussing The Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 19, titled The Purple Testament. And The Purple Testament originally aired on February 12th, 1960. It was directed by Richard L. Baer, written by Rod Serling, and starring Rod Serling, Dick York, and William Reynolds.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead.
Just crossed over. You're moving into a land, another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
And the opening voiceover for The Purple Testament, spoken by Rod Serling as always. Infantry Platoon, U.S. Army, Philippine Islands, 1945. These are the faces of the young men who fight, as if some omniscient painter had mixed a tube of oils that were at one time earth brown, dust gray, blood red, beard black, and fear yellow white. And these men were the models. For this is the province of combat, and these are the faces of war.
And from IMDb, the description, a U.S. Army lieutenant serving in the Philippines during World War II develops a harrowing ability to see in the faces of the men of his platoon who will be the next ones to die.
Does it actually say die?
Yeah, there's a bunch of E's at the very end of it.
That's a really good summary, actually.
It is.
That's one of the better IMDb ones.
Pretty much the crux of the episode, but in this episode,
I think that covers everything. Thanks for listening.
We're done. Good night. We'll see you guys next week. But I think this episode, one of our kind of common refrains of a lot of these Twilight Zone episodes has been, I feel like this is a feature film that's crammed into 22 minutes. This I think felt the most like a feature film, but they somehow seemed to take their time, I felt like, on this episode. The pacing felt to me much more like a full film, even though they still only had the 22 minutes to wrap it all up, or 25 minutes. And I felt like they wrapped it all up satisfyingly, and it didn't feel rushed to me.
Yeah, and when you said, talking about like whether it's a feature film crammed in or not, I actually thought you were going to go a different way, which I guess you kind of did, but said it in a different way, that I did not feel like this was a feature film crammed into here. It was paced like a feature film and sort of put together and shot like that, but there's not a lot of plot. The plot is very simple, so there's not a ton to cram in, which allowed them to kind of take their time and have some of these scenes, stretch out and be paced more like a feature. So I get that reference to it.
I totally agree. And I put in my notes that outside of maybe Judgment Night, this is the Twilight Zone episode that has felt most like a film to me. And one of those scenes I think that you're alluding to, there's a really neat scene. The main character is Fitzgerald, Lieutenant Fitzgerald. Mm-hmm. Fitz, there you call him a lot. And his captain, Captain Riker, who's played by Dick York from Bewitched. I'm guessing you probably picked up that you recognized him early on.
Yeah, although I recognized him, and I could not think of where he was from, so I actually had to go on IMDb and look at the cast list, and then as soon as I saw Dick York, I'm like, oh, Bewitched, okay. But this is like 4 years before Bewitched, so this is pre that.
He looks very young.
Yeah, and I thought he was interesting casting. If you've seen him in Bewitched, he looks exactly the same, and everyone else seemed like very kind of intense and battle weary,
grizzled.
Yeah, and he's just kind of like too genial. He like always looks a little bit like he's smiling and sort of. I mean, he was, I guess, goofy. A calming influence for the men. Yeah, but didn't have like the grizzled, like we've been battling and losing 10 men a day out of our company, blah blah blah, that the others all felt like. He felt a little out of place.
I totally agree, especially Fitz. Fitz is a very, very handsome, like very grizzled soldier, and Dick York is rail thin, and he's got this goofy kind of like Alfred E. Newman type face, like an oval face, and Yeah, he did seem kind of out of place, but there
Although
was
you know what he struck me as looking like. Sorry, before we get off of Dick York there, when he said like this kind of young, goofy, which I agree, but somehow he reminded me of Willem Dafoe a little bit. If Dafoe was goofy, and I was thinking of like the Dafoe character in Platoon, felt to me very much like the Dick York character here, except that Willem Dafoe has a sort of seriousness and intensity about him that York doesn't. But something about like their face shape and maybe just the age they were doing this and, you know, being in a military thing really reminded me of that role.
So there is a nice scene between Riker and Fitz in Riker's tent when they had come back from some mission and Fitz was struggling because he lost some men, and Riker kind of takes him in for some drinks and just out of their canteens. And along the lines of that pacing, that was something I was like, man, it's really nice that they were able to take time in a Twilight Zone episode to have these. We've been talking a lot the last couple episodes about character moments, and they had the time to develop this relationship between Riker and Fitz in their tent, and Riker kind of trying to console him, and Fitz, you know, essentially talking about the horrors of war, and then also talking about how he's seeing this glow in these soldiers' faces before they're gonna die.
Yeah, that was a great little scene. That's right near the beginning, because it's in that scene is where he reveals that he had written down these men's names the day before because he knew they were the ones that were going to die. It's nice that, as you said, that they made time for that. I honestly feel like you probably, and I should be clear, I didn't feel like this episode dragged at all. I was with it. But just in terms of like the information they needed and stuff, there's some Twilight Zones that really feel jam-packed. I feel like you could have probably cut 10 minutes out of this and not noticed anything was gone. There's a lot of stuff that was stretched, and I don't think that scene was necessarily one of them, but there's this definitely had plenty of time to spare. I'll say that.
And if we're offering up scenes that could maybe be cut, can I suggest that the last scene?
Yes.
I loved this episode, and the last scene not ruined it for me, but I really, really enjoyed this episode. And so at the end of it, so Fitz is seeing the faces of people that are going to die, and Riker, Dick York's character, he sees this last mission that they're going to go out on. He sees this glow in Riker's face, so he knows that Riker's going to die. There's a really nice moment where Riker's like, he's like, okay, he's like, Fitz, he's like, if you can see this, he's like, look around, tell me who's going to die. And he kind of like looks around the rest of the platoon, and none of them are glowing. And so he's like, nope. He's like, you're right. I basically can't see it because he's only seen Riker, and Riker's the only man that dies on this mission. Mm-hmm. And so before the last scene, of course, he sees, we have another great mirror moment in Twilight Zone where Fitz is looking in the mirror and he sees the glow that he's been seeing in his own face. And of course he breaks the mirror, and there's this killer final line, which, quote unquote final line, which should have been the final line, because they're sending him off to a hospital to get looked at because they all think he's crazy. And this driver comes, he's like, I'm here to take you to the hospital, whatever, pack up your stuff. And he sees the glow also in the driver's face, and he gets into the Jeep, and the driver's like, oh, you know, I'm a real careful driver. He's like, get comfortable. We got a 4-hour drive ahead of us. And he's like, I don't think we do. And it would have been
and then they drive off, and it was perfect.
Then they drive off. It was a perfect ending. And then they have this whole after scene that's like 5 minutes long of all the other soldiers that are like sitting around, and they hear an explosion of this car because they had to drive through like a landmined road to get
it's
to this hospital.
Very telegraphed. Like it would have been
Right.
fun even if they just got into the Jeep and they're like, okay, it's a 4-hour drive. It's like, and we know something's going to happen. Instead, someone's like, well, you got to take this road, and I know they've put some mines on it. And the guy's like, I'm a careful driver. I'm like, how does that help if there's mines?
Right. It was so and then they hear this explosion, and the other soldiers like, they're in the South Pacific fighting in World War II, and they're like, what do you think that was, thunder? And it's like, what in the hell was purpose of this?
You forgot the part before that, which, because I'm with you in that I don't want to say this ruined the episode for me, because I also liked the episode, but it came close. It was so bad. I actually laughed at an episode that had been very intense and serious and dealing with serious issues, because there's this giant explosion off screen. All of them jump, and then one guy's like, "Did you guys hear that?" It's like, yes,
right.
there was a
right.
giant explosion, and they all jumped. I'm pretty sure they heard it.
And while we're trashing, because I really, really like this episode, but while we're getting out some of the things that I did not care for, also at the very beginning, I really liked Serling's opening narrative, but I don't think we had the tilt down, not the pan, the tilt down from the skyscape as much as we had seen it before.
Yeah, actually, what they had was so you had guessed in our last episode or hypothesized that this was now kind of like their thing, like a stylistic thing that they had
Right.
sort of adopted as a signature from the show. And I think you're right, because they actually start it like they're on the star field, and it
Right.
starts tilting down on those, and then they didn't have something like good to tilt to, so they just sort of fade to black, and then they cut into another shot. So I
Yeah.
think you're right that that's like now part of their official opening. Even though they didn't really use it here, you saw it kind of get cut off.
At the end of Serling's, because I think the last part of that thing was when he says, "And these are the faces of war," right?
And
So
I
at the
know
very-
right where you're going with this.
Go ahead, finish my thought for me.
So it's actually pretty well timed that he's doing this voiceover, and I want to come back to the fact that it's about this whole platoon, which is kind of interesting. But and it's the camera's kind of parked right next to this transport vehicle as all the soldiers are getting out, and we kind of see all their faces.
Exactly.
And then as the last one's getting out, it like freeze frames, and then they push in on the freeze frame of them. And it's like super cheesy, like like
grainy
Dateline
looking.
bad reenactment sort of thing.
Yes, 100%. Okay, I knew that you would pick up on that, but that was so, for an episode that I really, really liked, those were two such boneheaded decisions, it seemed like.
Well, I'll say we've praised a lot of times the productions of these things working on a TV schedule and limited budget, and there was a lot of production value in this episode. Like there was pretty big cast, a lot of different scenarios. The opening scene that's like battle footage, some of it appears to be B-roll, but they found some really good B-roll to cut it in with it. Like I thought they really upped the look of this. Like it looked, particularly at the beginning, like you're in a war. Then when they go to their camp, it was like a TV show camp set.
Yeah.
But that's fine. They're a TV show. So there were some things done well. I would say overall, I thought this episode was pretty badly directed, because there are just like these weird decisions like that, like the way they set up that end scene. Because before the part you even got to about the explosion, there is this whole thing with like a guy's playing the harmonica, and the other guy's like, "Oh, you're getting pretty good." He's like, "Well, I'm playing it one arm because his other arm's in a sling." We're like, who are these people and why do we care? Like it literally was like they got out of the editing room. We're like, crap, we came in 2 minutes short, and they're like, I got a solution. We'll add a new scene at the end. So yeah, there were just a lot of weird things. There's some other things I want to talk about where there was like some bad direction of the secondary characters and some bad direction of the main actors. And again, I feel like we're maybe getting a lot of the criticisms out early, because I also enjoyed the episode. I thought it was an interesting premise, but this was not one where I came away like, wow, that director did really well with that material. I was like, that director did worse than the material deserved.
Okay, and just so you know too, Richard Bear, the director, we've seen he directed Third from the Sun, which we liked,
which
a
we
lot.
generally liked. Yeah, in fact,
Yeah.
I think praised there was a lot of style to that one.
For sure. Then he directed this one, and then there's going to be 5 additional. He directed 7 total episodes, and there's going to be 5 additional episodes if we make it that far. 5 additional episodes of Twilight Zone he directed. So, but yes,
Well, so far he's batting 500.
but has gotten at least good. Regardless of, I think the material was good enough that maybe it compensated a little bit for his not necessarily the greatest direction.
Yeah, and there were some parts that were done well, like the conversation you mentioned between Captain Phil and Fitz. There were some nice character moments and stuff, but then there were just some. I think you said boneheaded decision on the kind of push in thing, and I think there were some things that fell into that.
That's a perfect setup, because I did forget to mention this one line that I really liked between Riker and Fitz. At one point, Riker asks if there was. He's asking Fitz. He's like, "What's upsetting you so much about these 4 dead? Was there anything special about them?" And Fitz goes, "He's like, they were all under 21. Does it need to be any more special than that?" And I felt a lot of, having read Anne Serling's book about her dad, and obviously knowing Serling's military background, I felt a lot of Serling in this episode. I could see him coming up with this episode when he was at war.
Yeah, we've talked about that in a couple of the recent episodes. The sort of the influence of that seems to have had on him, that experience, and trying to bring that into episodes even that aren't directly about war. And in this case, you know, honestly, from the opening when it was about war, I'm like, okay, this is one where we're going to probably get some pretty clear proselytizing from Serling. And I think that that little interchange there was it. Because it turns out, like, it's not just the fact that they were under 21. It's the fact that he predicted their deaths. It's like,
Exactly.
But got these bits in where there were, you know, just a few lines there about just kind of how bad it is. And there was a line similar to that I loved, also very early on, when they're coming back from this first mission, just before the scene you were just talking about. And one of them says, "Well, we got the bridge, whatever they wanted it for." And this real, like, kind of disconnect between, like, the brass tells us to do these missions and we got to do this thing, and we don't understand the purpose or anything of it. And, you know, then they're talking about, you know, this bridge just kind of gets it gets napalmed all the time anyway. And I was thinking about the segment in Apocalypse Now where there's, like, this one bridge that apparently was super important, that it's not important to the plot of that movie, but they're, like, sort of passing through that at some point, and it's just, like, constantly bombarded, and, like, they're like,
yes.
yeah, we build it up during the day, and then they knock it back down at not every night. And that really reminded me of this.
I'm glad you brought up Apocalypse Now, because you don't see all the World War II. You know, anytime we've mentioned this a bunch of times, it's rich people sending young men to war. World War II, you don't normally see, you see these heroic guys that are behind their cause and all this stuff. You don't see that. Vietnam, every Vietnam movie is about how those soldiers are like, what the hell are we even doing here? Mm-hmm. You don't get that with a lot of World War II, but Serling was so anti-war himself that I think that bled through even to his portrayal of World War II.
Well, and I think that it's probably smart on his part to choose kind of the venue that they did, right? So it's not like, all right, we're in Germany, we're going to go take over this Nazi base. And people are like, right. Oh, why do we want to do that? Right. You know, I think the Pacific Theater people, you know, certainly from later generations were sort of less invested in or kind of aware of what was going on there. And even there, they're making the point that it's sort of unclear objectives. We're taking this bridge, we're not sure why. That sort of, not like this is our final, you know, push to finally win the war. Like they're within the context of World War II, kind of trying to make it as insignificant a particular objective or mission as possible, I think, to be able to get away with that.
And along those lines, a couple other things about this. One, I'm pretty sure that's where Serling was stationed when he was in the war, so that's obviously what he knew.
These are actually missions that he himself did.
Right. They finally released the gag order, and he could say whatever he wanted about him. And then two,
he also could see who was going to die before he turned.
Yeah. And two, I hate to sound too xenophobic about it, but I feel like we knew less about the Japanese people than we would about German people look more like us, and there was that sort of xenophobia, and also I think that they fought a little bit more like the fighting. Of course, this is pretty uninformed by me, but the fighting in Vietnam was a little bit more guerrilla tactic and a little less like we're seeing our enemies eye to eye. There was more like sneak attack. I mean, obviously landmines, not that they didn't have those in Europe, but landmines and things like that, more of the jungle fighting, more of the kind of more frightening fighting that you saw in Vietnam, I feel like was more reflective in the Pacific.
That might be. I mean, I don't know enough about it to be sure. I mean, I would say one thing to think about is that ultimately the U.S. was brought into the war by the Japanese attacking. So the Pacific Theater kind of in some sense, now I know the Japanese and Italians and Germans were allied. So once you were at war with one of them, you're at war with all of them. But the Pacific Theater is actually where the U.S. itself had been kind of threatened and attacked.
Yeah.
The other thing this reminds me of is there's an example I use in one of my classes where we're talking about directorial style and how you kind of come in with a vision and like, what are you trying to make this movie about, and then try to make everything fit with it. And I use a clip from Saving Private Ryan from the opening sort of D-Day invasion, but before they get to the beach, when they're just kind of like on the boats, like headed toward the beach. And I showed that, and I show a clip from The Thin Red Line, which came out the same year, was the Terrence Malick movie.
I have that in my notes.
Oh, great. So yeah, again, we don't plan this beforehand.
No.
But and that's over in the Pacific Theater, and I show it as an example of like, okay, here's two scenes that essentially have the same plot happening. It's a bunch of characters in boats, like going towards the beach to go into battle, but they're tackled so differently because of the different points that Spielberg versus Malick are trying to make, and what their individual movies are about makes them handle these things all differently. But one of the things we talk about is just the choice to set that over in the Pacific Theater is a different feel than setting it on, D-Day, Normandy Beach, which is, something that everybody who is at all aware of World War II history, like that's a pretty
classic,
concrete
everyone
example.
knows about.
Whereas
that.
Okay, they're over somewhere on some island in the Pacific. I don't really know what's going on, which kind of suits Malick's points better. And before I leave that, then I want to hear what you were going to note about that. In the very opening voiceover, this is, we've sort of cataloged as we went through. Most of the voiceovers have either talked about a specific person who's going to be the protagonist, or in several cases talked about a vehicle. So we had one where the spaceship sort of was in the opening voiceover, laid out the details of that, or a ship or whatever. And this one I thought was interesting because it talks about an infantry platoon. So it's not setting up a person or a vehicle. It's about this sort of group of men. Now, the episode itself turned out to really be about Fitz and his captain, Phil.
Riker.
Riker. What? Phil?
Yeah,
Maybe
Phil.
his first
No,
name.
Phil Riker. It
Okay.
is. Yeah, Phil Riker.
As soon as you say Riker, I start thinking Next Generation.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought it was an interesting setup, and doing that with the visuals of all the men coming off, that even though this episode was going to be about those two characters, it's giving some weight and like, yeah, all these people are in the battle and going through this. It's not just one person, it's this whole group. And I thought that maybe tied in too to, Serling's experience and what he was trying to say about war, and also reminded me of Thin Red Line, where one of the interesting things about that movie is it's really about this whole company, Charlie Company in that movie. In this case, it's A Company. And Malick kind of goes out of his way not to have a specific protagonist or one person who's kind of in all the scenes, and it's about how this whole company functions.
Yeah. So the only thing I need to go back and rewatch The Thin Red Line, because when it came out, of course, maybe this is showing what a dope I am, but like, it's like when Homer Simpson says he likes his beer loud, his TV loud, his beer cold, and his homosexuals flaming. I've watched, but I have a hard time with certain characters. Like, I don't like mob movies a whole lot. I appreciate Sons of Anarchy. I only made it about 4 seasons into it, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. It is the rare anti-hero that I can make it all. I love Breaking Bad. It's very hard to root for the anti-hero for me, and Saving Private Ryan was so, we're the good guys, we're doing this for good reasons, like, and not that we weren't also in the Pacific Theater, but those guys did not feel as good. They felt more real than the soldiers in Saving Private Ryan. But and I kind of liken, so Saving Private Ryan to The Thin Red Line is very much like Band of Brothers to The Pacific, which is also both of those series are absolutely fantastic, our HBO series. But The Pacific had some very gruesome, very like, I felt a lot dirtier watching The Pacific and watching The Thin Red Line. And it was very much probably the more realistic of the two. of those movies and series were The Thin Red Line and The Pacific, I would suspect, because war is horrific, and those made me much more uncomfortable than Saving Private Ryan, even though there's horrible visuals in that and in Band of Brothers as well. Those felt less difficult for me to watch.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head with sort of like, you like the clear good guys and heroics, and I want to be able to root for these people. And I guess I would not say that either of those is necessarily less realistic. In fact, I actually I did a paper in grad school about those two films and how they were both, in terms of the critical response and what the filmmakers themselves were trying to do, were sort of hailed as, very realistic portraits of war, but doing it in very different ways. And I think Malick in The Thin Red Line is much more interested, as you alluded to very smartly, that it's not about like this clear good versus evil. It's really looking at like, what is the nature of war, and why do humans do this, as opposed to in Saving Private Ryan, where it really was about like, you still see the horrors of war and what happened, but it was very much about like, what is the effect on these couple of individuals in it, and getting you rooting for them and emotionally connecting with them in a way that Malick very intentionally does not want you to do, because he wants you to have this higher level, wait, what are we doing here kind of thing.
Great point.
So I think you read the movie exactly right. Like it's what I think that movie is about. And yeah, they're just two very different approaches to, I think, both giving us accurate depictions of one facet of war, but focusing on very different things.
Yeah. Why don't we take a quick
I'll bring
break?
in as a guest speaker next time we talk about those movies.
Perfect. My foolish lack of knowledge on both of those movies. Let's take a quick break right now, and we'll come back and keep talking about Purple Testament.
All right, welcome back. We're still talking about the Purple Testament. And Mike, I had mentioned a couple of episodes ago, or maybe last episode, they all blur together to me for this at this point. Something about, it was 2 episodes ago in The Fever, about the sound design. And I actually kind of appreciated they did something interesting with the sound design of the slot machine, where it's like Franklin. And there's like coins jingling mixed into it. So it was cheesy, but like they were trying something interesting. Yeah. I wanted to, I guess, give a kudos and a criticism on the sound design on this episode. They had some great battle sounds, and I really liked that, anytime it was sort of B-roll or showing, establishing shots and stuff, you always had these sort of distant explosions and stuff going on, reminding you that they're in the middle of a war zone and there's stuff going on. But very conveniently, like, the war entirely stops anytime anyone needed to have any dialogue or discussion. True. And then there was actually the scene that you had mentioned earlier with the two of them in the tent, where we first find out that Fitz can kind of see who's going to die. And they're having this long discussion. There's been like no explosions, and they like pause for a second to like refill their drinks, and like a couple explosions like come in to fill in that gap, and then immediately the war stops again.
Well, I will, and I actually want to give the director a couple shout outs after this too, because I think we were a little bit critical of him earlier. But I will say,
I believe you said boneheaded.
As someone that is a video gamer and has played a lot of Battlefield 5, which is set during World War II, and they added a Pacific. The fact that we did not hear one single sound effect of an M1 Garand being fired with the ping of the clip being like ping, I found very upsetting, because I wanted to just hear that once. So, and before I give too many kudos, I will say,
wait, was that a kudo? That sounded like a criticism.
No, I will kudos now, but that was my thought about the sound. The final battle, like, I agree. It seemed like they were shooting they were creating a lot of the stuff. You said you noticed some stuff that was roll, but it did seem like they were actually having this battle scene. And when they go to the final battle, it was neat. They had these guys like slogging through water and, crawling up this embankment, but it was so, at least in my opinion, it seemed like it was very much a night filter, like shot in the day with clearly a night filter. that I found it very distracting, the night filter that was set over it. Maybe I'm wrong about it, but I don't think so.
Well, they had some continuity issues with what was daytime and what was night kind of throughout the episode. Although we didn't have anything as bad as the Hitchhiker one where it's like pitch black.
Right.
They cut to one shot of like high noon
Broad
and then back
daylight.
to pitch black. But yeah, there was some jumping around in time there. It is what it is. I want to throw out another good line from the this is from about the middle of the episode, and I'm throwing this out apropos of nothing other than I just saw it in my notes.
Get
I
it
wanted
in
to
there,
make sure we
yeah.
get it in. Yeah. Fitz has this long speech in the middle to the captain and the medical officer, where he's basically like ranting about like they both know he thinks he can see who's gonna die next, and kind of don't believe him. And I shouldn't say kind of, they basically don't believe him. And it goes on this long rant about things, but they're saying like, yeah, that's odd. He's like, that's not odd. And he starts listing things that are odd, like walking 25 miles and not getting a blister. That's
Yeah,
odd.
yeah,
He goes,
that's
this
right.
isn't odd, Captain. This is nightmare.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that one up, because right after, I think the last couple of weeks, I have been kind of praising that there hasn't been some super melodramatic acting. That was, I thought, insane. So that I thought was overly melodramatic. And then soon after that, they get back to camp. And I think it was S. John Lawner, I think is the actor's name. He comes into the tent, and I'm sorry, after they get back from the final battle, some other guy comes in and
Yeah,
to
it seemed
talk
like he
to
was someone higher up, like a colonel or general or something.
exactly. And he's talking to Fitz, and he's like, it was so matter of fact, it felt like he was reading his lines. And then
It
he
really
goes,
felt like they just grabbed a guy off the street and like, here, read
Yeah.
this. Like there was
Yeah.
no, like, well, you know, we lost some people. He was a good man. Blah 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 blah. I'm having turkey for lunch tonight, and blah.
right.
Blah. Like,
yeah. And he's looking at the pictures of Riker, of Riker's family and all this stuff. And then he's looking at him and talking about him. Yeah, saying he's a good man. And then he's like, war stinks. And he throws the pictures down, and he said it. He's just like, war stinks. And like,
Right,
it was
the way
so-
you said it
there was
had
no
more-
emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, I wrote
It
that
was
same
crazy.
thing. Like, really, after all this, you have no better thing. Particularly, like they had that great conversation. And look, I know these are different characters saying it, but this is the writer can control what these people say. Wrote this great stuff earlier, like you mentioned about, you know, they were all under 21. Isn't that special enough? Or, you know, like these things that
Yes.
really get at war. And this guy's just like, war stinks, and walks
Yeah.
away. Like,
You could have had, to bring back Apocalypse Now, that opening where Sheen is just freaking out. I mean, like, even by himself, I would have preferred to have seen Fitz just going through that like horrific, I mean, his was a drug-addled, you know, psychedelic trip, but I would have preferred seeing Fitz just like come back and trash the tent, or like get out his emotion, because we had invested in Fitz, and this guy just wanders in and reads his lines and then wanders back out. I was like, what the fuck was that?
And if Fitz would have come in, like, I think I agree with you. I think that would have been better. I think if Fitz would have come in and just like, he's just like resigned, like this is fate, I can't do anything about it, and he's just like frustrated, but just sort of internalizing it all, that would have been okay, because he had his
Yeah.
big moment earlier. I have no idea what they were doing bringing this guy in. He didn't add anything to it other than to say war stinks, which we already got, and we actually
Right.
got more from seeing the rest of the episode than from him saying it very blasé, which is almost like, well, does it? I don't know. I don't know if I can trust this guy. He doesn't seem to care.
And I could not believe that if they were going to insist on that, why not bring back the captain that they had gone to see to prove he was on Barney Phillips was the guy who played him. He
The
looked
medical
so
officer you're talking about?
the- It was the captain that, when you were talking about his rant, he's like, well, captain, he's like, no, that would be crazy. That would be, it was the guy who played there. He had the best way I can describe it, his face kind of reminded me of a turtle.
Oh, when he said captain, I thought he was talking about Captain
Riker.
Yeah, because it's him and the other guy there is it's like Lieutenant Colonel something or other, but he's in charge of the hospital. He's like the chief medical
Okay,
officer.
so that was Captain E.L. Gunther.
Okay.
And so, but that, why not bring that guy back? Because then you could have had that moment like, oh my God, you were right. Like you saw this glow in his face, and he's only in his face, and he's the only one who died. at least we had some sort of investment in that guy. I had no idea who this guy who just wandered into his tent was. It was
just a very
silly.
bizarre choice.
Yeah.
Although, when you talked about the melodramatic speech, I won't disagree with you, but I will say, if you thought that was melodramatic, it was actually like 3 levels down from about 2 minutes earlier when Fitz is upstairs. He's visiting Smitty, who's another one of their people from their company who had been injured and is now, and I guess looked like got shot in the shoulder, but was healed up, bandaged up, supposed to be getting better, and Fitz was visiting him.
Except for the fact that he was smoking in the hospital.
Which is an ongoing thing. So then I want to come back to a second, like the sort of plot mechanics of this, which was a whole separate thing. But so Fitz looks at him and, sees that look on Smitty, and he knows Smitty's going to die. And Fitz does like this huge, like literal cartoon double take. He's like turning his head back and then like turns back. What? And like if he physically could have popped his eyes out of his head like a cartoon, he would have. They were so close to that. And I was like, this is just ridiculous. Like that is.
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to start giving some propers to because I really like this episode and I feel like we've kind of been trashing it a little bit. So a couple things that I think they did really well for this time and era. I thought the lighting effect when he was seeing that they were going to die was kind of neat. Like at first it was just like a light came up in their face. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cheesy. But then they did sort of like a blurry kind of like glowish.
Right. They get like a sort of gauze glow filter on it.
Yeah. Which I thought was not only neat, but I felt like it was a little bit symbolic to, hey, these guys, their faces don't matter that much. They're just another casualty in this war. I don't know if that was the intent, but I thought that was a neat effect when he saw that these guys were going to die.
I disagree. I found the effect super cheesy.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, screw you then.
I have nothing more to add.
Okay. Fair enough. What else did I have? In the ward when he goes to see Smitty, I did think it was kind of neat that after he did at least some interesting stuff, because then of course Fitz passes out when he sees that Smitty's gonna die, and the camera goes to Fitz's perspective, and he like falls over on his back, and you get a point of view from Fitz as he passes out, and then he wakes up to this guy kind of waking him up. I thought was kind of neat.
Yeah, it's kind of like out of focus, like he's coming to and like seeing somebody looking down at him. Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, and the whole ward there, I actually thought that was a really nice, army hospital set.
Yes.
Filled with extras and stuff going on in the background, people, nurses and doctors checking on other patients and stuff. I liked all that. And I think a lot of the episodes we've seen really focus in on just a couple of key characters. And I thought the character of Smitty was a nice one in that it tied back to that beginning where it's talking about this whole infantry platoon, that this was a character who hadn't been specifically focused on earlier or talked about, but this sense like, yeah, these guys are going to know other people besides just the captain and Fitz talking with each other. Like they know other people within their company, and if they're at the hospital, some of their friends would be there and he would visit.
Right.
Like I thought it felt very real that to have him visiting, and the captain didn't even know he was there. He's talking with the medical officer. He's like, oh, well, Fitz is here. He's like, oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, he's upstairs visiting Smitty.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I did think when he mentioned he was smoking, which I at this point have a track record of assuming that that's going to be relevant, and I keep forgetting it's the 60s and just everyone's smoking.
Everyone just smokes.
I always think it's going to tie back to the plot. So as soon as you saw Fitz talking to Smitty, you know that he's going to have the look, and Smitty's going to be died. Going to be died. That's great. Smitty's going to die, and that and it's kind of going to be like a step forward. 'Cause one of the interesting things with this is we've seen some episodes where somebody has some special power or something, and basically we kind of see it once, and then you just kind of keep illustrating the same thing. A good example of this would be, I'm blanking on the title, the one where the guy, What You Need. Right, where the guy gives people what they need, and we even talked about like at the end, like he gives the guy he gives the guy the comb because he's going to need it to be on TV. And we're like, why did he have to give him a comb? It's well established. He sees ahead of time what they're going to need. This was not an elevation or anything forward. I thought they did a nice job with Fitz, like moving it forward to each time he sees somebody, it being a little different and playing a different way. Because, okay, he knew some people who were going into battle were going to die. Well, there's a good chance people going into battle are going to die.
Yeah.
Okay, as soon as you see him talking with this guy, we're like, oh, that's going to be interesting because somebody who appears to be healing up, not in any immediate danger, he's also going to predict their death. Maybe that'll convince the other people or something. So
it's like that one Ben Affleck movie, Ben Affleck and Samuel Jackson. Was that the one you mentioned one time about where he gets a bunch of stuff that he doesn't...
Paycheck.
Paycheck, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that one, like, yeah, once we sort of established one, there wasn't necessarily raising the stakes or changing the stakes for the next one. It's just like, okay, I guess now we'll see how the next thing fits in.
Yeah, it was more about paying it off.
Yeah, but so I thought this was good. But so okay, so as soon as you see him talking with him, you know he's going to end up seeing the light in Smitty's face before he walks away. And Smitty, like, puts down his cigarette on a pile of papers, and I was like, oh, that's going to be it. He's going to set the papers on fire and die in a fire. And then, like, they just cut back to it, and the cigarette was no longer on the papers.
Yeah, and Smitty's dead.
It's like, oops. Yeah, well, then Smitty's dead, and the orderly, like, checks him. He's like, they go quick sometimes, awful quick, and just walks away and leaves the dead body there.
Well, see you later. Yeah.
My coffee break, sorry.
Yeah. I didn't... I have another thought, and then I don't have a whole lot more of this episode beyond the closing narration, but... One bigger theme that I was thinking of the whole time is that question of, well, not that a lot of people are asking that question, but you do see occasionally that question of if you could know when you're going to die, would you want to know when you're going to die? Like, would that change the way you live your life? Should you be living every second like you're going to die in 5 minutes? Like, and I just wanted to maybe elicit some conversation on that.
What's the one for the angels? We had that part of that conversation, you know, where he is told, like, okay, you're going to die at midnight tonight. And that one's a little different because it's he ends up having to make the choice, like, to save himself or the girl. But there's something we talked about that. Would you want to know or not?
And I don't know exactly when, but I do know it's going to be the president that kills me with his refusal to protect me from the viruses at my back door.
Maybe via some act of stupidity like that, or just you're so stressed about it that kills you.
Yeah.
We had Scrubs on last night. Some old reruns.
You were wearing them, or you were watching Scrubs?
Both. Well, we put on our Scrubs to watch Scrubs. Like, you have to get into the show that way. Yeah. And I start talking like Zach Braff. And it was an early one, but there was this kind of moment. One of the things I always liked about Scrubs when it was at its best, and it was it was a little uneven sometimes, but it had this way of staying comedic but really tackling some more serious issues. Oh,
totally.
And there was at the episode we were watching, kind of comes up at the end where JD had been upset about a fairly young person, probably in his 20s, who was in there for pneumonia and was a smoker, and JD was trying to convince him to stop smoking, and he didn't. And he's like, yeah, that's probably be what'll kill him. And JD was kind of looking around at his friends like, yeah, I know what'll, Turk, it'll probably be, heart disease. And he goes he looks at himself in the mirror and he's like, probably stress.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah,
a very
it probably
serious
will.
Moment. Yeah. Yeah, Scrubs is great.
So the stress of the president will potentially be the thing that kills you.
That was a long way to go for that one.
But I brought it back around at the end, which is better than most of the time where it's like 20 minutes later, what the hell were we talking about?
So, and you and I have talked ad nauseum about mortality on this because it's clearly on Serling's mind in a lot of these episodes that he's written. But I can't imagine the horror of knowing, like, even because one of the other things about this episode that wasn't clear is when he actually sees the glow. Like, how far in advance does he actually see the glow come on for these guys? Because the guys at the beginning, he wrote their names the day before that were glowing, and then they died. With Smitty, he's literally talking to him. The glow comes up, and Smitty's dead less than a minute later. he when he sees his own face start to glow, he's dead in 5 minutes or so. So that was a little inconsistent, but I can't imagine.
Kind of, I think, in keeping with much of the Twilight Zone, where people have these special powers and stuff, where again they're in the confines of a 22-minute episode, where you basically just sort of take it and you're not supposed to ask questions about how did he suddenly get this ability, what are the parameters of it. It's just like, okay, he sees people are going to die, and we'll just sort of take that as it is. And I think that works fine for what the Twilight Zone is, because it's not really about those abilities, but you're right, it's kind of inconsistent because they never established the rules. It did strike me, I was thinking of any number of sci-fi or fantasy movies you could bring up, but the one that jumped to my mind was Edge of Tomorrow, or Live, Die, Repeat, as it was renamed.
Oh, I love that movie. Yes.
And again, that's not specifically about this ability that Tom Cruise gets, but in the span of a feature film, it does end up, usually you kind of have to set up the rules, and it does become important. Okay, exactly how did he get this power? How can he lose it? How can he control it, or what good is it? And those sorts of things. And Twilight Zone, basically in any of these episodes where people have a particular power, is completely uninterested with those details. And that's not a criticism, just sort of that's one of the things you just kind of have to take with the territory of what this is, because you could spend the entire 22 minutes with them just trying to figure out exactly the limitations of this and how soon or late it might be before someone actually dies, which would get us nowhere. But I would think if you were doing this as a feature film, to go back to something you mentioned early on, then I would expect to see that fleshed out more, and like, okay, when he sees it, they're going to die within 24 hours or something,
So in answer to my original prophecy or proffering or offer, whatever, if anyone knows when I'm going to die, please don't tell me, because I do not want to know.
I think this might be a cop out, but I think to me, whether I'd want to know depends a lot on what the answer is.
Yeah, true.
So if somebody said you are going to die, in your sleep comfortably at 85, that would be pretty awesome, because I'm like, okay, I know I have a long time left to go, and I can, you could even be like, okay, I know I can take risks because I know that these things aren't going to be what kills me. It's going to be that, and of course we could do a monkey's paw sort of thing, where it's like, that's the prophecy. And then it turns out, actually, I go in a coma tomorrow, survive in the coma for 40 years, and then die
because you were taking risks. Yeah.
Right. So there's different ways but I think like that would be very different than like someone telling you are going, in this case, okay, you're going to die in this battle.
Yeah.
Like that really affects things, but that also would raise, that you'd almost need to raise more questions, which this episode didn't, which I kind of wanted it to, about, particularly when he tells the captain, like, why doesn't the captain just say, this one mission I'm going to hang back,
sit out,
something, because he clearly does think there's maybe something to it, because he takes off his ring and he takes out the photos from his wallet and leaves them all there. So he's hedging a little bit, but he has the power to do something about it, unless we really think, which I kind of got the sense that Fitz felt, and the episode never explores this, I'm just reading between the lines, but I got the sense that he felt this was fate. Once he's seen it, there's nothing you can do. You can't change it. If he would have decided not to go on that,
he would have never seen it
or if he would have decided not to go on the Jeep at the end, he would have died some other way, like
a final destination.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm down with, so just to give tie a little bit more to applicability of this, I feel like there is sort of this not power, but I feel like people that Fitz was in the same situation as people that have a terminal diagnosis, where the doctor's like, you've got 3 months to live. And like whether it's the exact moment or whatever, they've been given their death sentence, or I guess inmates on death row, like there are people that don't have this specific glowing power, but that do know what their own death date is going to be. Or I hate to say, but people that commit suicide, that have planned stuff out, that do have that. And I can't imagine living with that. You talk about JD dying of stress. I can't imagine living with that hanging over your head.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I think there's probably a reason that we don't know. And I think you might be able to make a reference here, because I know I've seen some things like this, but I'm kind of like blank at the moment, that some sci-fi things where, they're basically, we have perfect health care, and, so you can live as long as you want, but we can't just, continue growing the population infinitely. So people basically have to choose at some point that they're going to die.
It's a little Logan's Runny. Isn't Midsommar? I only made it about 40 minutes into that movie, but isn't that what that culture was? Those two old people that jumped off. You know what? I don't even want to talk about that movie because it was so disturbing to me. But I think that there are plenty of references. That kind of reminds me a little bit of Logan's Run. It wasn't there a movie with
Logan's Run was like when they hit a certain age, then they
kill
know they're
them.
going to die. Yeah.
Yeah. And wasn't there a movie with maybe Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson? Is that a
That
thing?
is a Michael Bay movie. That is the Island.
I'm sorry I brought it up then.
Yeah, and it's not that. That is they're basically clones that rich people pay to have, like, clones of themselves grown to then harvest their organs if they need them.
Oh, okay. Never mind. So that's a super depressing. Do you have anything else on this one? Because that's a very depressing final thought from me. But
well, nothing major. I wanted to just bring in one thing about the sort of overall plot structure, I guess, of this. And what was intriguing to me, we've seen a variety of episodes where what I'm going to call sort of like the Twilight Zone element of it comes in early or late. Like some of them, we find it out right at the beginning. The four of us are dying, for instance, in the opening narration. It's okay, this guy can change his face to look like anybody. That's sort of the Twilight Zone twist of it. And other things where the twist comes at the very end, Third from the Sun. There were other twists and things throughout the episode, but the sort of final Twilight Zone twist is like, wait, they're actually aliens headed toward Earth, not Earthlings headed away, which is what we had thought the whole time. What I thought was interesting about this one is the plot was fairly predictable kind of the entire way. Like I mentioned, as soon as not at the very beginning, but once he sort of said, like, I see these I saw the light in their eyes, I know they're going to die. We're like, okay, that's the Twilight Zone element. And then really the only question is kind of like, how does this play out from there? And I'm not going to pretend I predicted the whole rest of the episode at that point, but like, as every segment went on, it's like, okay, this is what'll be next. So you're like, okay, he's talking to Smitty. We know he's going to see it in Smitty's face, and we'll see how Smitty dies. And then the captain's the only other one that we've really established as a strong character. So we know he's going to see it in the captain's face. What's going to happen with the captain? And then once the captain died, it's like, okay, the only thing left is Fitz is going to have to see it in his own face. So I was waiting to see a mirror in a shot. And as soon as there's a shot, like, boom, there's a mirror. Like, all right, there's where he looks in his face. And like, so that was all predictable. And I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, because it didn't make the episode less interesting. Because the question itself of how it all played out was kind of more important than what was the next step going to be. But it was an episode that never really surprised me.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so the parts that to me worked the best was really those character moments, particularly with Fitz and him trying to struggle to deal with this, and a little bit of the Cassandra complex where he knows the truth about what's going to happen to people. No one will believe him, and the stress of that, and which, as he calls it, a nightmare in his melodramatic speech, that was more interesting than if it had sort of been a surprise what things are going to happen. I did think some of the things they played as if they were more surprising than I think they actually were. Like, there's like 3 shots building up to him, like, finally looking in the mirror as it's like lurking right next to him the whole time. It's like, just have him look in the mirror and see the light. Like, we know what's going on here. Right. Although there was a great shot when he knocks the mirror down, it like shatters on the ground, and then he looks down and you see him reflected in several of the different mirror pieces, which is cool.
Like the 4 of us are dying, the multiple faces.
Except done much better.
Yeah.
Just because this is not important, but since I said earlier I was going to mention some stuff about the extras.
Good. By all means, put it in.
Well, to close the loop on it, when he's having the conversation with the captain down downstairs in the medical building after he's just come down after seeing Smitty dying. The guy who like determined that that Smitty was dead, like walks down the stairs behind him and then like just kind of like stands there in the background like he doesn't know what he's supposed to be. Like he has a line coming up in like a minute where he's supposed to go into the next room, but like doesn't realize he's still on frame or something. I was just cracking
He's like,
up
what do I do with
watching
my hands?
It was literally like, I guess I'll stare at this wall. Then he kind of turns and like looks back, like they're still talking over there. That was funny. Last thing in terms of the production, because I'm just going to continue railing on the filmmaker here, the director of this episode. Well,
Sorry, Richard Bear.
Another unforced error when Captain takes his photos out and like puts them down on the desk in front of him. He like intentionally stops and turns them to face the camera, even though there's nobody there. And then the next shot is like back from his perspective, so the photos are no longer facing him. It's like you could have just left him facing you, which would be the normal thing to do, and literally the next shot is going to show us the photos facing the right way anyway.
It's funny you say that because I noticed the same thing. I didn't write it down specifically, but I noticed the same thing.
Yeah, and it's just, it's a little detail, but it's the kind of thing that can kind of that I guess I'm annoyed by it as a film professor, because it's the kind of mistake I would tell my students not to make, because there's no reason to do it. And it's pulling us out of what should be, a really emotional scene. Like, oh, wait, maybe he really does believe him.
Right.
And instead you're like, oh, let's watch him block
distracting
for the camera.
Right.
But the question of whether they believe fits, I guess this is the last thing I'll bring up, and maybe is a bigger topic. What was interesting to me is that they chose to focus the episode not on like what he does with this power or how they would sort of test if the power was real, but he's really upset that no one believes him. He even tells the captain, like, that's all I want is for somebody to believe me. I don't care. Don't tell me about how I got it or what this does. Just tell me you believe me. And I thought that was really interesting and kind of powerful, that even in this sort of fantastical scenario where he can see people's deaths before they happen, there's this very human thing of like wanting company, and he's alone in this, he's the only one who can see this, but if somebody else believes him, at least he kind of has somebody to like empathize with about it.
Right.
I thought that was a really interesting choice to focus on that, and that's kind of what his big melodramatic speech is about, is not about, you guys are all wrong and I can see this and all these people are going to die. It's like, nobody believes me.
Right. I agree.
All right.
I don't have much.
Then I'm done.
Yeah, okay. So should we close this sucker out?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the second Shakespearean quote in a closing narration. We had a quote from Hamlet in the last one. So here's the closing narration. From William Shakespeare, Richard III, a small excerpt. The line reads, "He has come to open the purple testament of bleeding war. And for Lieutenant William Fitzgerald, A Company, 1st Platoon, the testament is closed. Lieutenant Fitzgerald has found the Twilight Zone." I really dig that one. And I would, as an improviser, I would just like to point out that I love in improv when you get a suggestion and you don't pay off that suggestion till the very end. So when we did the title last week and you guessed what Purple Testament was going to be about, I was like, I know I've seen this episode before and I have no clue what this one is about. So I love that we didn't know why they called it the Purple Testament until the very end of the episode. I thought that was kind of neat.
I like the fact that the title was paid off at the end. I'm with you. I think that was interesting. I will say, and I don't feel at all bad about criticizing a tiny bit of the voiceover, because we've been so effusive in our praise of it most of the times. And the opening one for this I like.
Yeah, why don't you unload on William Shakespeare about what a shitty writer he is?
Let me tell you something, William Shakespeare. No, it's more Serling just the end of Lieutenant Fitzgerald has found the Twilight Zone. I found like pretty cheesy, and this was like the one ending narration where it left me kind of disappointed. Most of them I really dig, and I feel like he does a great poetic job summarizing things. And this one just felt a little forced.
Can I fix it? Can I punch it up?
Yeah.
What if the last line is, and for Lieutenant William Fitzgerald, A Company, 1st Platoon, the testament closed in the Twilight Zone.
Much better. Solved.
Okay.
Let's go remake it.
Perfect. So we ready to sweat rate this out of 10?
Yeah, and we have not seen a ton of sweatiness in recent episodes. This was a
Oh,
very
boy.
sweaty episode. Everyone was sweaty all the time.
Yes, and we understand that they're in the Pacific fighting in a war, but this was a sweat.
So I think if they were not in the Pacific fighting a war, this would have to be like a 9. I'll drop it down a little bit because there's a justification for it. But oh my gosh, everyone is dripping all the time,
Yes.
and Fitz can't even like button up his shirt because he just got
Right.
sweat gushing out of it.
I had the exact same thought.
So I'm gonna say like an 8.
Okay, I had 7, so I'm completely fine with an 8.
I
And
think.
let's
Well,
go
and I
with
was
an 8.
debating. Let's say 7.5 and move on.
We're not doing half ratings on
We've
this
been
one.
doing half ratings.
No, we
all
have
the
not.
time.
No, we have not.
Fine, it was 8 1/4 just to screw
Okay,
you.
We're gonna say 8 because I will agree with you on that.
All right.
Okay.
But yeah,
we're giving an 8.
it was quite sweaty.
That is number 1 with a bullet. The closest ones we've seen are the Fever, I Shot an Arrow. Both had 6s. So 8. Congratulations, Purple Testament. You're the sweatiest.
And I
sweatiest
feel like
episode
our
we've seen so
scale
far.
is holding up. I'm glad that we refrained from giving those higher than a 6 because this was definitely sweatier than those.
Well, we only gave Mr. Denton a 3. So
But that was
we
like
might
our
have to-
second episode. I think
Right.
we retroactively should have
Yeah.
given him a higher score.
We'll have to go back and look at these ratings. When
When we do
actually
Deja
review.
review.
Exactly. We'll do reviews of all of our shows and rate how bad our ratings are.
If you already feel like this is pretty niche, just wait until we're reviewing our own niche episodes.
Rating. I think I like this one more than you did. But I would not. I was originally thinking of a 5, but there are some, as particularly that last scene. There were some screw ups that would prevent me from that, but I do not want to go lower than a 4.5 on this one because I really like this episode.
I mean, I feel like that means the rest of the episode was a 5 because that last scene by itself lowered the rating of the episode half a star. I actually did like this episode. I think some of the comments may have been more critical, but they were largely about the production. I thought it was a really interesting idea and question. I thought handled in a pretty interesting way. And Fitz, I thought, was very compelling, other than the couple of sort of over-the-top melodramatic elements. Like there were some moments of really good performance too, I thought. So I don't think I disliked this as much as maybe my earlier commentaries would have suggested. I did not think it was up to the level of 4.5. I think this was probably about I was going to say 3.5 or 4. I'll go with the 4 since you.
Okay.
Do
Do you want to hear some other 4s and 4.5s?
Yeah, that'll help us adjust
Some
the
4.5s.
rating.
One for the Angels and When the Sky Was Opened. Third from the Sun and The Last Flight, just our most recent episode other than this. Oh, and no, I got that one. And then some 4s, 16 millimeter Shrine, Time Enough at Last. I think that's it. And then we have a couple that we were going to have to average out these ratings because that I really liked, like The Lonely. You did not. So, but yeah, I think that's probably.
I think in those contexts, for me, I would say 4. It feels more
Okay.
like in line with those.
I'm fine with a 4.
But we don't always have to agree. We've
No,
disagreed
I
sometimes.
think we need to come to consensus, and I'm going to average out those walking distance and escape. Well, no, walking distance and The Lonely are the 2 that we did not.
What were our ratings on those? I'm just curious.
Well, should we settle these right now? Because walking distance was only, you said 2.5 and I said 3. Can we just call it a 2.5? I'm fine with 2.5.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then The Lonely,
You're doing what I wanted, so I'm fine with that.
The Lonely, you said 2.5. I said 5. Can I get you up to a 3.5?
That's a pretty big difference there.
Yeah, I
The
know.
Lonely is the sex robot one, right?
Yes. And I think I was ignoring that a little bit more easily than you were, which says something about my character. But
yeah. Okay, now that I'm remembering that discussion, yeah, I think that was kind of. Yeah, I think maybe 3.5 because maybe I was overly critical because of the gender dynamics, and you were
that was
critical
horrible
because of that. So
okay. So now we've got them all settled. Yay. Good, because that was bothering me on my spreadsheet of our ratings. Okay. Are we? Should
You
we
should
wrap
have
it
just
up?
added them. You're like, so that one got a 7.5.
Okay. So, Mark, do you want to guess what next week's episode is going to be about?
Sure.
It is entitled Elegy. This is episode 20 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, called Elegy. Elegy.
Okay. So I feel like it'd be too obvious that it's just someone like giving a speech about somebody else. So I'm going to say that it is somebody who disappears in some sort of mysterious way, and they find after some artifact where that person explains what happened to them.
I like that.
I'm thinking of the Agatha Christie book, 10 Little Indians, and Then They Were None, I think, when it was re-released, which I don't know if you remember that. It's a very classic Agatha Christie style mystery. 10 people on like kind of alone on an island and keep disappearing one by one, and all 10 are eventually dead, but they're all dead in ways that suggest somebody else did it. But there's nobody else there. Yeah. And the resolution to it is like the final chapter epilogue is like literally a message in a bottle that somebody wrote explaining how they did it all.
Well, I guess I don't have to read that one now. Anyhow.
It's quite a clever little story. I would say I haven't spoiled anything for you.
No, I'm teasing. Thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. Like we just said, next week's episode is episode 20 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled Elegy. If you want to watch it, of course, it's on US Netflix. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us, or you can find us at dejareview.com, which is going to see some updates in the next, probably before you hear this. When you can also leave us a voicemail or a text message there, and follow us on social media, and we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.